Modern Zelda has a major problem. Its dungeons suck.
How did it come to this? The divine beasts.
How are they this bad? For all the great things that Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom do, Great Dungeons is not one of them. And I think that's a problem. Because Great Dungeons are essential to the Zelda experience. They are a core piece of what makes Zelda, Zelda. And when Zelda went open world, it lost this core piece. And there will be people out there who try to defend Nintendo and say stuff like, oh, Breath of the Wild's open nature makes having traditional Zelda dungeons impossible. And to that I would say, bullshit. Because other games have done it, and done it almost flawlessly. When From Software announced they'd be taking the Souls formula open world in 2022 with the release of Elden Ring, people wondered how they would keep the traditional Dark Souls level in an open world game. And From Software answered this question almost perfectly with Legacy Dungeons. Basically, traditional Dark Souls levels scattered throughout the open world for the player to find. And when entered, they were basically indistinguishable from the real thing. And I wish open world Zelda was like this, but it's not. Instead of being indistinguishable from the real thing, the dungeons in open world Zelda are a cheap imitation. They pale in comparison to the real thing. They are like your friend picking up no-name potato chips when you ask for Miss Vicky's. And I'm tired of it. I'm tired of no-name potato chip dungeons. Nintendo, make Zelda dungeons great again. Okay, I might have gotten a little ahead of myself there. We should probably talk about why these dungeons in open world Zelda are so ass. And it all starts with the lack of meaningful progression. Basically, all these dungeons are handled in the same way. There are 5 switches or objects that need to be activated in order to open the door to the boss. Now, you can tackle these 5 switches in any order you like. It's completely non-linear. And that might sound like a good thing, but it's not. This completely non-linear approach basically makes it impossible for any sense of progression to occur. Since you can tackle these challenges in any order, they can't be tied to one another. So, Challenge 1 can't teach you something that might help you in Challenge 2, because the developers don't know which order you're going to do the challenges in. So, they end up feeling like 5 disconnected puzzles instead of a massive interconnected dungeon. The dungeons in older games didn't have this problem. They weren't as open-ended, so the developers knew which rooms and puzzles the players would encounter first, which allowed them to introduce mechanics in earlier rooms and then expand upon those same mechanics in later rooms. I'll show you an example of what I mean. The first room in Wind Waker's Forbidden Woods requires you to use a nut to open this door. Then, in a later room, you need to carry a nut on a platform to open the same style of door. Then finally, there's a nut that's surrounded by thorns that needs to be moved using the Deku Leaf. As you can see, each iteration of this puzzle gets harder as you advance through the dungeon. It gives the player a sense of progression and makes them feel like they're learning as they play through the dungeon. Now, let's look at a temple in Tears of the Kingdom. In the Wind Temple, you have to activate 5 turbines in order to open the door to the boss. You can access turbine number 1 by attaching this icicle to the lever and turning it. Number 2 by opening these doors and diving down this shaft. Number 3 by attaching this icicle to these gears. Number 4 by going to the bottom of the boat and defeating this construct. And number 5 by attaching this flat rod to the shaft and using the wind gust to turn it. As you can see, these are basically just 5 random puzzles. Only the 5th puzzle has a mechanic unique to the Wind Temple, and because of the open-ended nature of these temples, it's never expanded upon. The other 4 honestly are so random they could be placed anywhere else in the game and nobody would notice. There's no progression, there's no through line in these puzzles, and it makes it feel like a bunch of shrines instead of one cohesive dungeon. It has no-name potato chips written all over it. So next, we're gonna look at the aesthetics of each dungeon. Or should I say lack thereof. Traditional Zelda dungeons use a mix of sight and sound to create a rich atmosphere that makes each dungeon feel unique. If I showed you these two clips, you could differentiate between the two of them. The architecture, the enemies, the color palette, it's all different. It's very obvious that these two dungeons are not the same. Now, let's look at the divine beasts from Breath of the Wild. These clips are from two different divine beasts. Could you honestly tell these are from two different divine beasts? Because if you said yes, you're a fucking liar. They're from the same one. But seriously, take a look at these 4 clips. These clips are from 4 different divine beasts. They are all the same. They have the same brown color palette, the same Sheikah architecture. They are almost identical. And this doesn't only apply to the divine beasts, it also applies to the shrines as well. Because they all share the same aesthetic. They all look the fucking same. Which completely ruins how special the dungeon should feel. When you first come across a divine beast, it feels special, it feels unique. And then you enter it and realize, oh shit, this is just another fucking shrine. To really nail this point home, let's look at the aesthetic variety in the temples of Twilight Princess. You can tell them all apart even when they're this small. Now, Breath of the Wild. It's like looking at a can you spot the difference picture. They're all the same. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. Oh, it's a known fact that Breath of the Wild's dungeons are aesthetically dog shit. But they fixed it in Tears of the Kingdom. All the dungeons in that game look different. And while that's technically true, it doesn't mean it was done well. Let's take a look at the Wind Temple for example. Just like with the Divine Beast, it has a really cool exterior. I love the flying airship theme. But just like with the Divine Beast, when you enter it, it all kinda goes to shit. Like, I don't know about you, but this doesn't look like the inside of a ship to me. Just big, rectangular, generic hallways. This could be the interior of any stone building. A castle, a temple, a fucking aqueduct? And it all kind of just looks the same. There's not really different areas that would make you think it's a real functioning ship. Now, look at the sand ship from Skyward Sword. It has a sail and a mast you can climb on, an engine room, a bridge to keep prisoners, safety boats, and even a plank for fuck's sakes. The airship from Tears of the Kingdom has large empty hallways and some gears sticking out of the wall. Another temple I have an issue with is the Lightning Temple. Now, I think the developers meant for this temple to be creepy, but it's not, and it's mainly because of the music. I haven't mentioned it to this point, but all the music in these dungeons fucking suck. It's exactly like the music in the rest of the game, it's just so understated. And while this may work in the open world while you're exploring, it doesn't work for dungeons. It kills any kind of atmosphere the dungeon is trying to create. Take a look at the Shadow Temple from Ocarina of Time. While the visuals certainly help, it's the music that makes this place so creepy. It's foreboding, it makes you feel like this is a place you shouldn't be. The Forest Temple also has great music. It's eerie and keeps you on edge, and even though there's a whimsical element to it that makes you feel safe, you know something is very wrong with this place. The Lightning Temple kind of looks creepy, but it doesn't feel creepy because the music takes such a massive back seat. It feels like you're just exploring some random structure in the open world. It doesn't feel special. And that's the problem with most of these dungeons. They don't feel special. They kind of just feel like more shrines. And what really makes it feel this way is the way they are structured. Typically, in a Zelda dungeon, you'll have moments where you'll get a new thing and think to yourself, where in this dungeon can I use this new thing? Whether that be a small key you can use on a locked door you saw 4 rooms back, or a new item that completely recontextualizes the entire dungeon. It forces you to pay attention to where you've been and actually makes you use your brain to make progress. It makes it feel like the dungeon is one huge cohesive puzzle that is woven together in some crazy intricate way. that is not how the dungeons in open world Zelda feel. To see what I mean, take a look at these graphs made by Mark Brown of Game Maker's Toolkit for his series Boss Keys, which is amazing by the way, and if you're interested in this stuff, you should totally watch it. But yeah, they are basically a simplistic way to represent a Zelda dungeon. As you can see, this one looks complicated because the water temple is a fucking bitch. There are many branching paths, different ways you can use your small keys, and multiple times you have to change the water level. It's hard to navigate. It's almost like it's a dungeon or something. Now, look at the one from Breath of the Wild. This is for the divine beast Va Naboris. But it might as well be for all of them because they're all the fucking same. You unlock the map, then you complete these 5 terminals in any order you'd like. There's no structure here, there's no dungeon. These are basically just 5 separate shrines. But it's even worse than that, because regular shrines you actually have to find yourself through exploration. These dungeon shrines are just marked on your map, so there's no wondering where to go next, there's no navigating through these dungeons. Open world Zelda prides itself on organic exploration, meaning no waypoints, no markers on your minimap. You find shit in the world by exploring. But as soon as you enter the dungeon, it turns into a fucking Ubisoft open world game, with markers on your minimap telling you exactly where to go. And it makes navigating these dungeons so straightforward and easy. And I know older games have straightforward dungeons as well, but if they are straightforward, they usually have a great aesthetic, or interesting narrative and mechanical progression, which the dungeons in open world Zelda don't have. And man, it kinda sucks. I don't enjoy shitting on these dungeons. I want them to be good. The biggest complaint with Breath of the Wild was the dungeons were ass, so I thought for sure that Tears of the Kingdom would address this. With its 6-year development time, the longest of any Zelda by the way, and reusing Breath of the Wild's open world, there was no excuse not to make the dungeons better. I mean, I guess they technically made them better, but going from ass to only kind of ass is not good enough. And without good dungeons, a Zelda game fails to feel like a Zelda game. When I think of my favorite Zelda games, the dungeons are always the first thing that comes to my mind. When I think of Wind Waker, I think of Dragon Roost Cavern and swinging on this fat-ass dragon's tail. When I think of Twilight Princess, I think of how creative and different Snow Peak Ruins is from anything else in the series. When I think of Skyward Sword, I think of how much I hate every second of that game that is not spent in a dungeon. Dungeons make Zelda games. Nintendo just has to make them great again.